I want you to understand who my wife is before I tell you what happened at Christmas. Her name is Sylvia. She's the kind of woman who still sends birthday cards by mail. Real ones, with stamps, not a text with a balloon emoji. When our son was growing up, she kept a notebook in the kitchen drawer, where she wrote down every meal she made, so she wouldn't repeat the same thing twice in 2 weeks. She learned to make tourtière from my mother, and she makes it every December without being asked. She's not the type who needs credit for things. That's actually the problem, if I'm being honest. She never needed credit, so some people stopped giving it. I should also tell you where I was standing when I realized something had gone very wrong that year. I was in our garage in Barrie, Ontario, the second Saturday of November, pulling the Christmas lights out of a plastic bin that had been shoved behind the snow tires since January. It was maybe 2 degrees outside. I could hear the radio through the door to the kitchen, and I could hear Sylvia on the phone. She had that voice she uses when she's agreeing to something she hasn't fully thought through yet. Measured, polite, a little too quiet. I didn't think much of it at the time. When I came inside, she was standing at the counter with her tea, looking out the window at the backyard. The bird feeder we'd put up in October was swinging in the wind. She didn't say anything right away, which was unusual. Sylvia is not a woman who goes silent for no reason. I asked her who she was talking to. She said, Renata. Renata is our daughter-in-law. She's been married to our son Fletcher for 4 years. They live about 40 minutes from us, in a newer subdivision outside of Innisfil. Big house, 4 bedrooms. Fletcher works in logistics and does well for himself. Renata does something in digital marketing. They don't have kids yet, though I know Sylvia is hoping. I said, what did she want? Sylvia turned around and put her tea down and said, she wants us to host Christmas this year. I said that seemed fine. Our house is smaller, but we've done it before. We've got the table that extends, the good dishes we only bring out twice a year. And then Sylvia said, at their house. I waited. She wants us to come to their house. Sylvia said, and host it there. I still wasn't completely following. I asked her what that meant exactly. She picked up her phone and read me the text Renata had sent as a follow-up to the call. I'm going to try to give you the essence of it because I don't think I could do it word for word without my blood pressure going up. The idea was this: Fletcher and Renata would provide the venue, their house, and our family would gather there on Christmas Day. 22 people, Renata's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, their 2 kids, my brother and his wife, their adult children, Sylvia's aunt who was visiting from Victoria, some cousins, 22 people. Sylvia would cook. Renata had helpfully included a list. I'll read you the list. Roast turkey, 16 pounds minimum. Honey glazed ham. Tourtière. She specified 2 because everyone loves it. Mashed potatoes, enough for 22. Sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow top. Green bean casserole. Roasted root vegetables. Cranberry sauce, homemade. Dinner rolls, also homemade. A cheese board for when people arrived. Gravy, she wrote real gravy, not from a packet. Stuffing. And then dessert, a Yule log, butter tarts, and a tray of squares. 14 items, for 22 people, in someone else's kitchen. There was also a note at the bottom of the text. It said, we'll handle drinks and decorating. Let us know if you need anything. I read that last line twice. Let us know if you need anything. As though Sylvia were a caterer they'd hired and forgotten to ask about parking validation. I put the phone down on the counter. Sylvia looked at me. She wasn't upset in the way you might expect. She was doing that thing she does where she gets very still. It's not calm, exactly. It's more like she's sorting through something in her head and hasn't finished yet. I said, you're not doing this. She said, I don't want to cause problems. And there it was. That sentence. The one that had been costing us, quietly, for years. I want you to understand something. Sylvia and I have been married for 31 years. We are not dramatic people. We don't make scenes. We grew up in households where you kept your voice down and you handled things privately, and you did not air your grievances at the dinner table. That's just how we were raised. And I know, that somewhere along the way, the people in our lives learned to read that as an invitation. Renata had been reading it that way for a while. The first Christmas after she and Fletcher got married, Renata had asked Sylvia to bring 3 dishes to her parents' place. Sylvia did it without complaint. The following year, she'd asked Sylvia to pick up the turkey from the farm on the way because it's closer to you. It wasn't, particularly, but Sylvia did it. Last Easter, Renata had suggested Sylvia come over the day before to help set up, which turned into 6 hours of Sylvia cleaning, arranging and reorganizing the pantry, while Renata was at a yoga class. Every time, Sylvia said yes. Every time, I watched it happen and said nothing because Sylvia seemed to be managing, and I didn't want to step on her choices. I said nothing too many times. I want to own that. But I was looking at this list, and I was looking at my wife standing in our kitchen on a cold November Saturday, and I felt something shift. I said, Sylvie, this is not a reasonable thing to ask someone. She said she knew. I said, then you're going to say no. She said, it's not that simple. Fletcher wants Christmas at their place. He mentioned it last month. Fletcher, our son, who apparently knew about this plan and had not once, not in any of the weeks since he'd discussed it with his wife, called his mother to ask if it was okay. I'll get to Fletcher, I said. We can go to their house for Christmas. We can bring a dish, 2 dishes. We are not running a catering operation out of their kitchen for 22 people. Sylvia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, let me think about it. I let her think. I gave her until Monday. On Monday evening, I came home from work. I manage a commercial HVAC company, so November is busy. I was tired, and Sylvia was at the kitchen table with a notepad. She'd been trying to figure out the logistics of the list, whether she could prep some things the day before, whether their oven could handle the turkey and the ham at the same time, whether she could do the tourtière in a week ahead and freeze them. I sat down across from her. I put my hand over the notepad. I said, Sylvia. She looked up. I said, you've been cooking Christmas dinner for 30 years. You have never once asked anyone else to do it for you. You have never sent anyone a list. You have never shown up to someone's home and expected to be waited on while they worked. She didn't say anything. I said, we are not doing this. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, then what do we do? And I said, I have an idea. I want to be clear that what I did next was not impulsive. I thought about it for 2 days. I looked things up online at night after Sylvia was asleep. I called my brother Ray, who has a talent for cutting through nonsense that I have always admired. He said, without hesitation, do it. She'll regret not doing it for the rest of her life if you don't. So I did it. I booked a Christmas trip to Prince Edward Island. We'd talked about it for years. Sylvia's grandmother was from Charlottetown. She used to tell Sylvia stories about Christmas there. The snow, the way the whole island went quiet on Christmas Eve, the smell of the ocean even in winter. Sylvia had always said she wanted to go someday. Someday had a habit of not arriving. I found a small inn outside of Charlottetown. It was the kind of place that had a wood-burning fireplace in the common room and a dining room that served a Christmas dinner on the 25th. 2 nights, the 24th and 25th. Breakfast included. A few $100s more than I would have spent in a normal year. But I didn't particularly care about that in the moment. I booked it on a Wednesday afternoon from my office. I sent the confirmation to my personal email and printed it when I got home, and I put it in an envelope on Sylvia's nightstand with a handwritten note. The note said, Merry Christmas, Sylvie. Just the 2 of us this year. Everything else will be fine. I heard her open it in the morning before I was fully awake. I heard her stop moving. Then I heard the quietest sound. She's not a crier, my wife, but she made a sound that I will remember for a long time. She came around to my side of the bed and she said, You booked this? I said yes. She said, We're actually going. I said yes. She sat on the edge of the mattress with the envelope in her hands for a minute. Then she said, We need to tell Fletcher. I said I would handle it. I called Fletcher that evening. I told him that Sylvia and I had made other plans for Christmas this year, and we wouldn't be able to make it. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, What do you mean other plans? I said we were going to PEI, that it was something his mother had always wanted to do, and we'd decided to do it this year. He said, Dad, we've been planning Christmas at our place for months. I said I understood that, and I was sorry for the short notice, but we had made our decision. He said, Who's going to? And then he stopped. I waited to see if he'd finish the sentence. He didn't, which told me he already knew the answer to what he'd been about to ask. I said, Fletcher, your mother got a list with 14 items on it. 14 for 22 people, in your kitchen. I want you to sit with that for a minute before you say anything else. Another long pause. He said, I didn't know Renata had sent that. I said, You knew about the plan. He said, I thought it was going to be more shared. Like, split between families. I said, Did you say that to your wife? He didn't answer. I said, I'm not angry with you, but I need you to understand that your mother has said yes to a lot of things over the years without being asked properly, and this one was too much. We're going to PEI. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. I hung up. He called back 20 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. He said he understood, that he was sorry, that he'd talked to Renata. His voice was flat in a way that told me the conversation with Renata was one he was not looking forward to. Renata called Sylvia the next morning. I wasn't there for the whole call, but I was nearby. Sylvia was calm. She used the voice she reserves for situations where she has made up her mind completely, and there is nothing left to negotiate. I've heard it maybe 4 or 5 times in 31 years. It is not a loud voice. It is the most certain voice I have ever encountered. Renata apparently said that it wasn't fair, that she'd been counting on this, that the family had been looking forward to it. Sylvia said, "I hope the family has a lovely Christmas." Renata apparently said something about how selfish this was. Sylvia said, "I've thought about that and I disagree. Merry Christmas, Renata." And then she ended the call. She came into the living room and sat down and said, "Okay, that's done." I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I'm better than I've been in about 3 years." We drove to the ferry at North Sydney the morning of December 23rd. The sky was the color of old silver, which Sylvia said was exactly how she'd imagined it. She took photographs from the deck even though her hands were cold. The island appeared slowly through the mist, low and dark at first, then clearer. She grabbed my arm without saying anything. The inn was everything I'd hoped. Stone fireplace, handmade quilts on the beds, a view of the snow-covered fields from the window above the desk. The woman who ran the place left a bottle of local red wine in the room when she found out it was a special trip. Sylvia put it on the windowsill and said she wanted to look at it for a while before we opened it. Christmas Eve, we walked around Charlottetown, found a little church with an evening service, and sat in the back pew and listened to the choir. Sylvia knew some of the hymns. I did not, but it was nice to sit in the dark with her while the candles burned. Christmas morning was quiet. We exchanged small gifts on the bed. I'd found an old print of the island from an antique shop online, framed. She'd gotten me a leather notebook because she knows I've been wanting to write things down more. We had breakfast in the dining room with 4 other couples who were all there for their own reasons, and nobody asked us anything difficult. The dinner that evening was served by the inn's small kitchen. Turkey, stuffing, roasted vegetables, cranberry, butter tarts for dessert, which Sylvia said were nearly as good as hers. We sat by the fire afterward and she fell asleep in the chair, and I read a book and the snow came down outside the window and I thought, this is it. This is what we were supposed to be doing. Fletcher texted on Christmas afternoon. It said, "Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope PEI is everything Mom wanted. Give her a hug from me." I did. What happened at their place I heard about gradually, in pieces, over the following weeks. Renata's mother had apparently stepped in and coordinated a potluck situation. People brought things. Some of it didn't line up. There were 2 salads and no gravy. Someone bought a turkey from a grocery store that was the pre-cooked kind, and it was fine but not what anyone had expected. Renata's sister had tried to make a Yule log that collapsed. Fletcher had spent most of the afternoon managing logistics he hadn't anticipated managing. By all accounts, they got through it. No one went hungry. But I was told, by my brother Ray, who heard from his wife, who spoke to a cousin who'd been there, that around 3 in the afternoon, when the meal had been served and cleared and the desserts were on the table, Renata had gone quiet. Not the way Sylvia goes quiet. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes when you realize you'd built your idea of something around one person's presence, and then that person wasn't there. I don't say that with satisfaction. I genuinely don't. I say it because I think Renata is a young woman who doesn't yet understand what she has, and I hope that Christmas was the beginning of her figuring it out. That's the most generous interpretation, and I'm trying to hold on to it. Fletcher called us a few days after we got back. He called on a Sunday evening, which is when he usually calls, and his voice was different. Quieter, he asked us how the trip had been, and Sylvia told him about the ferry, the church, the fireplace, the butter tarts. He listened without interrupting, which is not always his habit. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. About the list. About all of it." Sylvia said, "I know, sweetheart." He said, "Renata and I talked. A lot. She understands. She's going to reach out to you." Sylvia said, "I'd like that." He said, "Next year, can we do it at your place? Like we used to?" And Sylvia said, "Of course, come for the whole weekend if you want. I'll make the tourtière." After she hung up, she stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in her hand. I was at the table with my coffee. She didn't look sad or relieved, particularly. She looked like someone who had been carrying something for a long time, and had finally put it down in the right place. She said, "I think next year I'll try a new recipe for the butter tarts." The ones from the inn. I want to see if I can get it right. I said that sounded like a good project. She said, I should have done this years ago. I said, yeah, me too. She nodded, poured herself a coffee, sat down across from me. Outside, January was doing what January does in Barry. The bird feeder was still out there. She'd filled it before we left, and the sparrows had found it while we were gone.